All right, people have filtered in and we are excited to be sharing about purple teaming and purple teaming with ATT&CK today. Um, Once again, welcome. This is our second installment of 2020 for PlexTrac webinar series entitled Purple Teaming Made Easy with ATT&CK. I am Dan DeClaus, founder and CEO of PlexTrac, and excited to get this kicked off. I hope you guys are all enjoying your day. Appreciate taking time to learn with us today, and hope you're staying safe during the COVID pandemic, and hope that everyone is enjoying from a warm or comfortable area in their house or office, staying safe. But again, thanks for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, really excited to have you here, and we'll dive into the topic: purple teaming made easy with ATT&CK. Today, Sean, our VP of Success, Sean Scott, is going to be presenting a little bit, as well as I am going to present around purple teaming. Sean will discuss around MITRE ATT&CK, and then we're going to kind of dive into a brief demo of how you can conduct a simple purple team engagement using ATT&CK and be able to highlight how simple it can be to start these exercises in your own organization. So a little agenda. We'll just do a kind of a brief introduction, kind of dive into what a purple team actually is and what purple teaming is how that would reflect in your environment. Kind of get into the nuts and bolts of MITRE and the ATT&CK matrix. Then we'll kind of show you how to use the ATT&CK matrix to structure purple team engagements and purple teaming throughout your enterprise, as well as performing an ATT&CK-based engagement demo with PlexTrac, just to kind of highlight how simple it can be to get started doing purple team exercises using the ATT&CK matrix and being able to collaborate through a tool like PlexTrac. So let's kind of just set the stage. So what is purple teaming, and what is the concept meant to be? Traditional sense of red versus blue from the purple team concept is that you have the red team, which is primarily focused on doing proactive assessments, deeply technical activities like penetration testing, trying to engage in social engineering exercises that will truly exploit weaknesses within your environment and within your users, or even physical assessments where they are trying to identify gaps in the physical security controls of the organization to gain access into the facilities and be able to highlight any control gaps that you might have from the security perspective. Very technical, typically, and from the red team concepts, very intricate in terms of the techniques and tactics that they approach. From the blue team side, blue team is traditionally the defenders, the people that are doing the monitoring for these types of activities, trying to fill a lot of gaps and a lot of holes, identifying any intrusions, and then responding to those incidents as they come about. Typically, very reactive and in a defensive type of posture. So like to kind of sum it up, the red team is responsible for trying to make the bad things happen, and the blue team is responsible for trying to stop those bad things and at least detect them so that they can alert on them and respond. If we were to expand this a little bit, because here at PlexTrac, we actually take a little bit more abstract perspective on purple teaming, and that the red team is truly anybody that's doing any kind of proactive assessment, trying to identify security gaps within the enterprise or within the organization that they're attacking. So we would include things like vulnerability assessments, framework-based assessments, any kind of team that's doing a proactive approach towards security and identifying those gaps in the security controls, whatever mechanism and whatever tactics and techniques they might be using. On the blue team side, we expand that a little bit more to include people that are implementing the controls, the security engineers, or in any of the IT staff that are responsible for implementing controls, obviously patching the systems and making sure that all the systems are up to date, and then also developing policy and implementing policy, whether that's from an administrative control perspective, so basically just stating what the policy is and that people need to adhere to it, and trying to protect that from an administrative perspective, or from a technical policy perspective where you can actually implement technical controls that adhere to the policy that gets implemented as well. At the whole, it's more around risk management. And whereas the red team is in charge of identifying risks in whatever capacity from a proactive perspective, and then the blue team is responsible for remediating those risks and preventing the risks. So taking a little bit more of a proactive mindset, but making sure that the controls are in place and trying to be proactive as to what are the other controls that might have weaknesses. In the traditional sense, we've seen a problem when we have this red versus blue kind of concept. And when these red teams and blue teams traditionally go into a purple team engagement or just any kind of red team assessment, whether that's a black box penetration test or a more advanced vulnerability assessment, we've seen some issues, and these are the problems that we want to resolve. That typically there's a lack of common goals. What is the red team actually trying to do, and what are the goals of the assessment from the blue team perspective? Oftentimes the red team is going to be trying to identify any and all techniques using a broad swath of tactics to get into the organization and identify the weaknesses. Whereas the blue team, they may have specific things that they want to be testing first because they know they're going to have issues in other areas. And so they may even avoid going to get a penetration test or more advanced assessment, knowing that there are these certain weaknesses that they just know they haven't fixed yet. So they may avoid altogether getting one of those more intense assessments. Also, we have some uninformed threat modeling. From the red team perspective, again, they're going to use tactics and techniques that they have in their tool belt that get them into the organization. Whereas they may not actually be approaching the assessment from the perspective of the blue team, where it's, hey, we're in a specific vertical or a specific industry, and these are the specific items and security controls that we want to test first, or having known exploits out in the wild that exist for this type of industry or are more likely to have. Right. And so once the engagement takes place, there's a lack of post-assessment collaboration, being able to have the red and the blue teams actually work together to identify what the remediation activities actually need to be and whether those have actually been validated. Oftentimes, even within internal red teams, but especially within external red teams, those teams are already on to their next engagements and have limited time to reflect with the blue team from the previous engagement. So there's a challenge there regarding this post-assessment collaboration on actually getting the work done for fixing the issue. And then we have this, concept of people being nervous about flipping the quote unquote evil bits, where we're nervous to teach junior engineers or junior security people or even veteran security people how the adversaries are actually conducting these exercises. So how the red teams are actually performing the hacking. And there's been natural concern around teaching the defenders how to actually hack. But we are all under constraints regarding time and budget and skill set and talent and just in general in the security industry. So the more that we can share knowledge, the better. So the more that the blue team actually knows what the tactics and techniques are that they should be looking for, even if they can conduct them themselves on their own environment, that helps everybody to identify these security issues quicker. Kind of a concept of a rising tide lifts all boats or all ships. So those are some of the issues that we've seen, when we talk about your more traditional red versus blue kind of paradigm, and even in some of the traditional sense of purple teaming, where the red team is coming in directly to just try and identify all the security weaknesses in one fell swoop, and the blue team is overwhelmed with trying to identify all the ways to defend and detect these from these techniques. So when we talk about purple teaming, we want to really truly identify the ways that the red and the blue team actually come together to perform these engagements in a more productive manner. So the mechanics of these really should be that they should be frequent and short duration engagements. We're going to focus on a small set of techniques and controls that we want to identify fixes for right away. We want to come together and share what the objectives actually should be of this engagement. We want to iterate quickly. So you may end up testing a small amount of controls and a small amount of techniques, but it might only be for a few days or even a week, right? And you're identifying closely with between the red and the blue team, what are the actual objectives of this engagement? What are the actual items within our controls do we actually want to identify as weaknesses, or if we're actually doing well in those so that we can move on to the next set of controls. So what the objectives really should be is are we able to detect some of these activities, and can we enhance our detection capabilities? Can we remediate the items that are found in a much faster way? The more items that are found and the faster those are fixed, the better the security posture of the organization. Can we transfer knowledge quickly? Not only from the red team to the blue team. I think you often hear about the red team transferring their knowledge of all of their techniques for attack and proactive assessments to the blue team. But the blue team should also be transferring knowledge to the red team of how they're actually identifying these issues and how they're actually identifying the fixes for them. That helps both teams, up their game, so to speak, in how the red team is going to come back the next time and try to circumvent the controls that were put in place the first time. The blue team is going to learn from the techniques and try to identify what are the ways that they might come at us from a different angle. And so, again, the more knowledge that is transferred between both teams, the better off we're all at, the better off we are. And then truly sharing an offensive security mindset. The blue team is often overwhelmed with, alerts and reactive measures that just come in and kind of swarm their day. But if a blue team takes a step back and is a little more disciplined, and like, instead of spending all of our day doing the reactive things, we're going to dedicate some time to being more proactive mindset and say, where are the issues that we would that we think would be identified in a penetration test or a more advanced security assessment or some kind of proactive audit. And truly starting to identify what are the ways that we should already be trying to fix these things before they're actually identified within an engagement or from a security assessment tool. So that is kind of our primer for what we consider to be effective purple teaming. We do have a white paper that discusses a lot of these concepts as well, and you're free to download that from our website. But this is the general overview of what we consider at PlexTrac to be effective purple teaming. And it's truly a collaborative effort between both the red and the blue teams. So with that, I want to hand the stick over to Sean, who's going to kind of dive into the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, and then we're going to discuss, how we can put these pieces together.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. All right, folks. Hey, I'm Sean Scott. I'm the VP of Success here at PlexTrac. Happy to be having an opportunity to chat with you all today. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the nuts and bolts of the MITRE ATT&CK Framework. So up to this point, Dan's been giving you an incredible overview of the concept of purple teaming. But if you haven't been involved in purple team operations in the past, or you really don't even know where to start, we're hoping that this can provide you with the foundation and at least a place to start in a way that's very, very easily digestible. So, who is MITRE? So if you've heard of the ATT&CK framework, you've almost certainly seen the name MITRE before that. And why should I care, and why should I trust these people? Well, MITRE is a pretty interesting and almost unique organization, and they have their hands on a lot of things. A lot of incredibly smart people work there. Back in my days in the DoD, I had opportunities to work with some of these incredible engineers and scientists on everything from crawling in the bellies of airplanes with new equipment to wildland fire to cybersecurity. They're a nonprofit think tank and highly technical folks, and they're primarily funded by the U.S. government, even though they are a private or quasi-private organization. They are a nonprofit with a mission for the public good. And in the course of their work, they partner very heavily with not just the DoD, but with U.S. three-letter agencies. And that gives them incredible, some might even say unprecedented access outside of those agencies, access to the intelligence that they are collecting on advanced persistent threats and large-scale criminal-type organizations, all right? But also, they are charged and get paid to operate the National Cybersecurity Federally Funded Research and Development Center. So there's a number of these things in critical areas where we need smart people to move the needle. And this organization actually supports the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. So why do you care about this last bullet? Well, because ultimately, whether you decide to use MITRE or not, you've already paid for them. It's your taxpayer dollars at work, both your personally, your dollars and your organization's dollars. And they've done some good work. So what is the ATT&CK framework? Well, it helps to know a little bit of the history. It really was born out of some of the Fort Meade experiments to try to figure out how do we detect advanced persistent threats that are out there. You know, attribution is a very difficult problem because code is copied and it really is very tough to attribute things. But one thing that we have noticed over time is that, you know, malicious actors, they're just like us, they're seeking return on investment. And so they tend to use the same behaviors over and over again. And the same group of people will do that same sort of thing. So if we have a mechanism for classifying malicious actions and in identifying ways of talking about those commonly, we can start to develop those patterns, and it aids in a tool for identifying who's actually behind particular malicious activities. But ultimately, this helps us all answer the question, because we are classifying actual documented adversary activities in the wild, how good are we at actually seeing those things and detecting them and responding to those things? And that's the really neat thing about, you know, ATT&CK, is that ATT&CK's not built on hypotheticals, or it's not built upon, you know, lab exploits or proof of concepts by researchers. It's built from incident response and the forensics that went into some pretty some pretty heavy investigations. What also is pretty cool is that this has been a purple concept from the start. You know, from the get-go at its creation, you know, the red teams have been using the ATT&CK framework to build their scenarios, but the blue teams have then been using the same framework to measure their progress in their ability to detect and respond to these categorized behaviors. Before I go any further, I do need to acknowledge that I'm going to keep using the term attack today. What I mean when I say attack is enterprise attack, and that was the first one. But since enterprise attack, there have been 3 other categorization matrices published by MITRE. Enterprise attack is a post-exploitation categorization framework. You know, it's right of boom after, you know, we get that initial access, right? Pre-attack is a way of classifying all of those tactics and techniques and procedures that happen in the pre-exploitation phase, in that surveillance and that reconnaissance phase that leads up and provides the details and the ammo needed to get that initial beachhead. Mobile, pretty self-explanatory there. You know, it's a classification system for attacks on mobile systems. And the newest member of the MITRE ATT&CK family is ICS, Industrial Control Systems. So as Simon says, try them all. All good stuff. Excuse me. So basics of attack. Once again, it's not really that cosmic. It's a categorization system. It's a way for us to classify and commonly talk about things. So there's 3 layers to the framework, of which MITRE really takes care of 2, and then more or less leaves the 3rd to industry and to government, you know, to us as the community. So at the top level, you've got your tactics. There's, I believe, 13 of these now. Inside of those, there's techniques, of which there's hundreds. And inside of those, there's procedures. And so if you come from a DoD background, you've probably heard the acronym TTP before. I have no doubt that it shares a common lineage, but we're going to step through these things and kind of explain what each one means. So tactics. Tactics are the adversary's technical goals in any stage of the attack lifecycle. So if you've been in information security for longer than a month, you've probably seen an attack lifecycle you know, line that looks something like this. You know, we start with the initial access, maybe we start at pre-exploitation, but we end up with getting the crown jewels out of the environment. And all of these stages have a specific objective, right? In lateral movement, I'm trying to move from machine to machine, host to host. Collection, get the crown jewels. Exfiltration, get them out. Just last year, MITRE added another tactic, which is impact. And the name's a little misleading because the objective is to cause an impact, either through the denial of availability, the degradation of integrity, and to actually have an impact on the business function of the targeted organization. Now, because these are loosely framed on stages in the attack life cycle, they tend to run somewhat laterally. You can't get to collection if you haven't established your initial access, or if someone reboots the machine and you haven't established persistence. But as we all know, as we move through the attack lifecycle, there are many opportunities for moving back down the chain and restarting in new environments. Down from the higher level of tactics, those stages in the life cycle are techniques. And techniques are just a bucket for how we group like actions that the adversary takes. And there, you see some examples, you see an example here, right, of a tactic with 3 techniques inside of it. So persistence, here are 3 ways, categories that you can use to achieve the tactical objective of obtaining persistence. And what's interesting is that the techniques themselves can actually support multiple tactics. So later on today, we're going to take a look at a couple techniques that support defense evasion, but those same techniques can also be used to achieve tactical objectives earlier in the attack life cycle in the privilege escalation tactic. I've only just shown 4 of the techniques that are available for the tactic of persistence, but there's a lot. For some of these tactics, there are dozens and dozens of techniques. At the bottom of the food chain, if you will, and really where the rubber meets the road, are the procedures. So the tactics and techniques are cerebral classifications, if you will, but you don't actually type a technique into a keyboard and make a bad thing happen. The procedures are those, no kidding, command line inputs or parameters that you're feeding to your tool in order to attempt to trigger the effect that will meet the objective that you're trying to accomplish with that tactic. So the good news is that for the most part, you don't have to go out and recreate or invent these on your own. There's a number of different organizations and efforts today that are cranking out procedures that are all mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK Framework. So one of our favorites is Red Canary. They do a great job. They're an atomic red team. Their atomics are, in some cases, they're just one-liners. Can this thing happen in your environment? Do you have controls in place? And so these become the procedures that you can test against, once again, where the rubber meets the road. So when you put all this together, and here we're just showing the tactics and the techniques, and I know you can't read this, and that's the point, because this is an extremely robust classification matrix, which is why we need to use it with care and scope things properly. If you go to MITRE's website, you'll note that you can't even fit, on one window, you've got to scroll because of the dozens of techniques that map to each of these tactics, not counting the procedures. And generally, once again, MITRE leaves the procedures to the community, but there are some available on their site as well. So, all right, so now we've got an introduction to MITRE. How do we use this framework to facilitate our purple team engagements? Well, all starts with the planning, right? He who fails to plan plans to fail. So, when you're sitting down and you bring your team leads from your red and your blue together, getting back to those shared objectives that Dan talked about, how do we decide what it is that we're going to test? Well, this is where MITRE makes it really, really helps, because we can take existing risk intelligence from all the various sources we have, and we can map that intelligence to the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. Over on the right-hand side, you see that I have a partial screenshot of a tool called the Attack Navigator, and this is a free tool that is available from MITRE. You can go poke around and play with it on their website. Nothing there is persistent, but you can set up your own server. And this allows you to come in and create heat maps. And what do the various colors mean? Well, they really leave it up to you. They can mean, whatever you want them to mean. A dark red could mean that, we've had a successful exploitation using this technique in our environment and there is no mitigation in place. A light pink could mean that we have observed attempts to use this technique. They were initially successful, but we were able to respond. Yellow could be, this is external threat intelligence. We here at PlexTrac believe that the best intelligence is always internally and locally developed threat intelligence, but that doesn't mean that external threat intelligence isn't valid, especially if you don't have a good procedure for tracking and maintaining that locally derived threat intelligence. But then we need to decide, okay, great, we see where we've got some potential weak spots here based upon our heat mapping, but what are we actually going to test? Well, one thing that we would highly recommend is that you don't peanut butter spread your test across multiple tactics. we're going to pick one technique across all 13 tactics in the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. That would be like trying to create defense in depth, by putting one linebacker every 10 yards on a football field. That's just not going to work for you. If you remember from our earlier slides, the tactics are relatively based upon an attack life cycle and build upon each other. So if you are able to concentrate your efforts and really gain a high level of strong defense in one tactic, you can potentially break the chain that enables the further stages and the latter stages of the attack life cycle. But when we're doing our planning, we don't just want to look at threats to determine what it is we're going to test. We also want to take a look at, where have we put efforts into defenses? A lot of organizations, they spend a lot of money on defenses, but they really don't have a strategic plan for how their defenses should deconflict, overlap, provide defense in depth. And the MITRE ATT&CK framework can do that for you. One subtle change to the screenshot on the right, as you see, this is another layer that I've created using the attack navigator. And this allows you to start mapping your defensive efforts. And once again, the colors can mean whatever you want them to be. Dark green can be that we have implemented controls here, we have tested them extensively, and we feel pretty good. Blue can be that we have implemented controls but not tested them. However you want to do it. But the great thing is you can overlay these two to really start to try to identify where are those gaps to help you narrow down what it is that should be priorities for what you want to test. But then, of course, there's that last step. It's not just about the tactics and the techniques. It's about the procedures that you're going to fire, right? Those red canary atomics. Praetorian is another great source of those procedures. Here's the thing that's most important about the procedures that you select. Regardless of what you do, everyone's got to be in the know. The whole concept here is to get to an end state at the end of the engagement where we know exactly what we're going to do to strengthen specific defenses. And we do that by determining the effectiveness of our detection. And if the blue team doesn't know what shots are going to be fired, they can't necessarily have their sensors in place to observe whether or not detection occurred. We're not trying to hide anything here. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about testing defenses, and not just using whatever, as Dan said, tools I have in my belt to make the bad thing happen. All right, so what do we do when we've got our plan? It's time to execute. Well, this goes back to what Dan said, keeping the scope tight, keeping the number of techniques and even procedures that you're going to test, to a small and manageable number, because iteration is the key, right? We don't just want to fire each one of these procedures each one time unless they weren't successful and our defenses are good. So after each iteration, what is it that we need to be talking about between the teams? Well, first of all, was the procedure successful? That's the obvious one. But then from the blue team, was the procedure observed? And for all of these things, if it wasn't successful or if it wasn't observed, why or why not? And what's the fix? What do we need to go implement right now? And even if it's just on one test box, the target of whatever that procedure was, is this thing going to prevent the bad thing from happening in the next iteration? Because every slideshow has got to have a obligatory iterative process graphic, here's my proof to you that I can make a circle in PowerPoint. All right, we're going to take a little squirrel moment here and talk about some tips for debriefing because, I come from a DoD background, and one of the things that was drilled into me earlier was 90% of the learning happens in the debrief. And we just talked about the importance of iterative debriefing so that we can get to those fixes during the course of the engagement. So it's worth taking a few seconds and talking about how do you do debriefing effectively, especially when you're doing it frequently. Well, the first mistake I see a lot is that people don't allow adequate time for data collection and notes prep. I would rather have a smaller vulnerability window, a period of the exercise is live, and then have a 2-hour gap that allows the operators on both sides to collect their data, collect their notes, correlate their activities across their teams, confirm observations, and bring solid data to the debrief. Because if you ever walked into a debrief that starts right after everyone walks off the keyboard, so to speak, then you realize that they're not very effective. Nobody's really got their debrief points ready to go. So everyone needs to come to the debrief with their data prepared in a chronological data. Everything needs to be time-stamped, ideally to a normalized clock. And this is for both red and blue. What do you need to bring to the debrief? Well, what were the parameter? What was each action that was taken? You know, each procedure that was initiated, or on the blue team, each defensive response to an observed action. You know, what was the method of the action? What was the payload? What was the fix? And then after you initiated your action, whether once again that's on red or blue, did you observe any corresponding or subsequent action in response from the opposing team? Okay, so you bring this data properly. Properly sorted and correlated. And here's one really effective way that I've seen debriefs run many times in the past. It's very simple and it's chronological. You start out a clock, on a big screen, digital clock with a fast forward at the time that the engagement began, and you run the clock sequentially. You speed it up. It's like, okay, we started at 0800. All right, hit the clock 10 times speed. Does anybody have anything before 0830? Red's like, yeah, stop. Okay, go with your data. 0823, we initiated atomic 1, MITRE 1 against box, 10.1.3.2. Appeared to be successful. Blue team, was this observed? Negative. That sort of back and forth so that you ensure that all of the events are shared, that no events go unrecognized, and that everyone has an opportunity that if it wasn't observed during the exercise to know that it wasn't observed and to figure out how it can be detected in subsequent engagements. All right, enough of the squirrel. Back to talking about execution with MITRE. And let's talk about your post-engagement actions, because once again, no engagement is done until the final debrief is complete. So what do you need to actually make sure that you do before you close up for a cold beverage on Friday? Well, remember, we started with planning that took into account our defensive mapping, that defensive heat map. Well, hopefully we have implemented, at least in a test environment, some things that we're going to get out to production that are going to make us better, and we can update that for future iterations. And then we need to talk about our velocity. The mistake that almost all teams will make when they first begin purple teaming is they're going to bite off more than they can chew. And it's not going to allow them they're going to have a mutually exclusive situation. We can either iterate or we can hit more test objectives. And we'll always take the former over the latter. You're looking for quality over quantity, measured and successfully implemented new defensive measures. So I would say that if there's one thing that everyone has learned over the last 2 months, is that sometimes quality really is better than quantity. And I've got 50 rolls of the cheap stuff in my garage I'm never going to touch. And I'd gladly trade them for a 4-pack of Charmin Ultra Soft. But finally, draft your next engagement. The environment's going to change. However, you're never going to remember what the things that were on your mind, the things you want to focus on next time, like you are while you're still in the heat of the moment. So at least draw up a rough sketch of what the next engagement's going to look like for you. All right. So now we're going to pop on over to an example of execution using the PlexTrac platform. So let me get that up for you. And Dan, while I'm doing that, did you have anything as far as a poll or any words for the team here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and poll. We've kind of been talking at you quite a bit here, but we got a quick question for you. Now that you kind of have a perspective of purple teaming and the MITRE ATT&CK framework, we just kind of want to see what you guys are doing in your environments today. So I'm going to launch this poll, and if you just don't mind, we'll take a few seconds here to answer it. But are you currently utilizing the attack matrix in your security program today? Got several answers funneling in here. Thank you for your participation. We'll give everybody a few more seconds to vote. All right, this looks like a good representation of the whole. Oh, got one more. Oh, wait, a couple more trickling in. I guess we'll give them a few more minutes or seconds. All right, fantastic. So we will go ahead. Thank you for everybody for answering. I'll go ahead and share those results just to kind of enlighten everybody that's on the webinar. But so it sounds like several people are utilizing the MITRE ATT&CK matrix in some capacity, which is great. Others are not yet, but are hoping to. And then some are just now learning about it. So we're glad to be able to share some of our knowledge, and definitely would encourage you to look to your peers for for additional information around attack matrix. Okay, Sean. Now what are we going to do? Are we going to like actually try to do a purple team engagement within the last 20 minutes of a webinar?
Yeah, Dan, you know, we're going to do a hardcore pen test. I've got my good buddy, John Strand here with me, and we're going to, no, actually what the purpose of what we're going to show here is actually going to be pretty simple. You know, we've been talking about how, you know, MITRE ATT&CK is not unapproachable. It is something that people can use today and structure things easily in their environment. And you know, you don't need PlexTrac to do this, but we want to show how you can use a tool like PlexTrac in order to really rapidly build an engagement that's going to give you some definitive and easy to digest results. So if you're not familiar with PlexTrac, we tend to do most of our work in the context of reports. I've got a particular client here, or organizational unit, Project 7 Industry, and I've built out an empty shell of report for this month's May purple teaming exercise. And you can see from the title here that based upon our analysis that we want to focus on the tactic for defensive evasion, which is TA0005, okay? So, all right, so I've got this empty report here with nothing in it. What am I supposed to do with that? You know, based upon the fact that I know that I want to be testing various procedures from TA005, I'm just going to look for things that are in my database, write-ups that are already associated with that particular tag for that tactic. And I see that I've got quite a few. And I'm just going to concentrate today on, I think, things that we can actually test with atomics. So I'm going to grab a number of these right off the get-go here, and I think I've got plenty to go, and I'm going to add these things to my report. So Dan, now what I've done is I've created a playbook, a run book, if you will. These are all the various things that we're going to test in the course of this engagement. And you can see it's not really a lot. And if I was to take a look and preview one of these particular atomics that we graciously stole from our friends at Red Canary, you can see that the actual command line inject here is actually just a one-liner. But this one-liner is going to provide us with actionable information that we can do in our environment. So I think I got my buddy Dastardly Dan on the red team here. I'll play the blue team. And hey, Dastardly Dan, would you mind kicking off our first procedure? I think we're going to run a MITRE atomic number 1.
Sure. Yeah. And Sean, just as a side note, I mean, I think it's important to note that, you know, we're conducting a purple team exercise right here and now, but we're completely remote. You know, we're able to collaborate, you know, over the phone and stuff, but we're able to see the same view of the test. And so oftentimes, you know, remote pen testing is definitely going to be a factor today. I mean, in today's world. But I think another important thing to keep in mind is that a lot of purple team exercises are conducted where you might bring somebody on site. What's important, you know, from this perspective is that it doesn't have to be that way. You can definitely conduct remote purple team exercises and be able to, you know, still collaborate effectively on, hey, Sean, I'm actually conducting this test right now, which is actually what I'm doing while I'm talking to you. And I'm taking a video of it, and I'm going to go ahead and say like, okay, yeah, you know what? I confirmed execution of this thing, and just give me 1 second, Sean, while I upload my evidence.
Maybe while you're executing that, I'll make a couple more points, folks. You notice that, you know, we start out, you know, we brought these in from our database. Everything is at a severity of informational because we haven't done the test yet. And everything's at a status of open, and nothing's been assigned to an operator. But these are all aspects of things that you can do collaboratively. While Dan's finishing up his test there, I'm going to hop over and just maybe take a look at last month's report, you know, our April purple team engagement. And as you can see in this particular engagement, we ran it last month. You know, after the atomics were run, the procedures, we've got some things that have been closed out. You know, you can see that this one was never even assigned to anyone, so it probably wasn't successful. You know, defense is already in place. But then we've got some things that we did need to clean up. And the great thing about PlexTrac is that you may have noticed that I searched for those particular procedures via tags. Well, these tags stay persistent, and I can do analytics. And I'm not going to show off analytics today because we're running a webinar in about 2 weeks to show off a lot of the new things that we've got in PlexTrac. But a very easy way, you know, to be able to sort and just see hey, how am I doing in tactic 1005 today? Or how am I doing against all things in the atomics? Dan, how are we doing with your pen test there?
Well, Sean, unfortunately, I did succeed in that in one of the exercises. So I went ahead and I signed that to you. I uploaded some evidence, and then I escalated the severity to critical, and then I made a comment. So if you can, take a look and see if you may be able to make some changes there.
Yeah, I can see that, Dan. I've got, yep, I have been assigned T1170 Mishta. All right, I'm gonna go take a look what you got there. I see that you have updated it to critical and it has been assigned to me. So what do we got going on here? We got a video here. So let's take a look at what's going on. So, hey, Dan, since I got you on the phone, why don't you explain to me what you did here?
Yeah, so basically I just took the atomic and I copied in the command execution that they informed us to try. I used the URL that they did, popped open a command prompt and copied that in. And, upon successful execution, it was expected that a calculator, the notorious calculator, would pop, meaning that I've actually confirmed remote code execution on your system. So this is a bad thing, right? Typically, I guess just for anybody, if you randomly see calculator pop, something is probably amiss. But in a real engagement, you wouldn't normally see a calculator pop. But so this just means, Sean, that we've got some issues probably with your endpoint detection capabilities. We might need to push some group policy, or potentially even just enable Windows Defender.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send this over to my buddy Nick, and I'm going to have him attempt remediation. And Dan, can we get a retest for first thing in the morning?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So that's pretty much, the extent of what we're trying to demonstrate here is that this doesn't have to be some cosmic high-level exercise to really start being able to utilize the MITRE attack matrix in your environment, especially if you leverage all the wonderful tools that the community has provided. Now, we've shown a very simple procedure here, and we acknowledge that. Some of the procedures are more complex, but there's a great entry point for just about everyone in your environment. So, with that, I'm going to terminate our demo here, and we'll just really move us on to opening this whole thing up for a little bit of review and sorry about that, and some Q&A. So just quickly in review, actually, Dan, why don't you take this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, our mission for today was to really try and introduce everybody to the purple teaming concept and how it avoids the kind of traditional red versus blue mentality and truly brings in that collaborative effort where you're working together for a common goal. And the faster you can do these activities, the quicker that you can identify the gaps in your security posture, the quicker you're going to get them to a remediated state and then actually improve your security posture. So these things don't have to be these really long built up things where you're saving a lot of money for just a huge purple team engagement, once a year. They really should be iterative and they really should be ongoing. And you don't have to have a lot of skill and expertise to be able to do these things. Now, it definitely helps, and definitely you want to be employing either internally or externally people that can go deeper. But if you don't have that skill set in-house today, you still can take the resources available to you and start practicing and start working on these things. And that's the value that the attack matrix really brings to the forefront, is that it provides this common framework. It provides this common language saying, I want to focus on the lateral movement tactic for the next month. Right. And so I'm going to read up on the different activities and techniques that adversaries are using in the wild. I can utilize resources like Red Canary, or I can go and purchase tools that can also conduct some of these activities on my behalf, things like Scythe. And so all these things you can bring into your program. You don't have to have the deep pen testing knowledge to still be able to identify some of those initial gaps that would be what some people would either consider the low-hanging fruit or things that you may have never thought of before. So the value that provides is that you actually can get started and you can actually start working quickly without like a deep amount of expertise, but then you start to learn And anytime you are in an environment where you're learning new things, it sparks new ideas. Oh, I didn't think about the fact that we've got this group policy configured in this in this environment or in this subnet differently than we have in the other ones. So I should test that differently, or I should put a little more focus on this tactic. And it can, at the end of the day, this really actually provides more effective engagements. It's not a wide swath every time of like, show us all the things that are wrong. It's the red and the blue team coming together and saying, no, I want to really make sure that we've got some of these tactics buttoned up. So if I'm concerned about privilege escalation, let's dive into those techniques. What are the common techniques that people are going to be using? Let's test those, make sure we can prevent those. And then we can start to talk about the next time, what are the more advanced ones, or what are the ones that people are using that might not have been documented yet? And then after that, after you've done that engagement, it just dovetails into the next engagement that you're going to do. And we can't emphasize this enough, of that it's a very iterative process. It should be weekly, if not daily, types of exercises. Take an hour out of your day and just go test one technique, right? And then the other value that this provides is you start to see your progress over time. You can do analytics and saying like, hey, last time we tested these, here's the progress that we've made on fixing these items. And truly, the best, obviously shameless plug, we feel like the best way to do that is using PlexTrac. We provide a central platform to do these kinds of activities, and that's really what we're geared for. But if you don't have PlexTrac, there's certainly opportunity to get started with purple teaming using the MITRE ATT&CK matrix and being able to come to that more collaborative assessment framework and methodology. So with that, we want to just kind of open it up for any questions. We do have a few questions in the pipeline here. So,
and one of them, Dan, I'd like to go ahead and maybe if you prepare to answer that second one, I'd like to go ahead and just demonstrate. The first question was a technical one about the platform. So one of the questions was, how did you actually you put that video into that engagement, into that finding here? So in PlexTrac, we have the concept of a preview modal, which is what I've been showing you here, which is what the data looks like once it's been entered. However, for each of these findings, I also have the ability of editing them. And so all Dan did was he came in here and he opened up the screenshot section and he uploaded the video. So it's called screenshots and videos because it does both. Gave it a little title and saved it. He also went into the findings detail and gave me a little snippet here in the recommendation about what I can do to remediate this particular vulnerability. So we've been trying to not get too deep into the mechanics of PlexTrac and just focus on MITRE and attack and purple teaming. But if you're really interested in and would love to talk to you more about how you can build this stuff out with PlexTrac, definitely hit us up at sales@plextrac.com and happy to show that to you. Great. Dan, you want to take the second one there?
Yeah, so this next one is, if we try manual purple teaming exercises, how would we organize it? Should we, how would we go about selecting the production systems, and how are we going to simulate attacks from our machines? So that's a great question. So you don't necessarily have to have all of the attack or penetration testing tools to be able to test some of these things. If you use things like the the Red Canary Atomics, where it's an open source GitHub repository, Sean, if you pop open that, maybe you can kind of go to the link.
Yeah, right? I'll open up another screen and bring over a window.
Yeah, so it's an open source project that actually just shows you all the potential techniques that you can use within MITRE. And so you can, how I would do it is I would select a subset of machines that you want to do a sample on. And those may be production systems, may not be, but some people will actually use a production build in a test environment. So it's like this simulates it like if you're testing a workstation defense, which workstations are usually going to be the first line of defense from a breach, right? Is someone's going to try phishing your receptionist or phishing the HR person, and if that person clicks on a link or downloads a file and executes it, you're really that first foothold in is from that machine. So maybe take a workstation that represents the standard build for your organization, or a very similar one from a technical policy configuration perspective, and then try to run those commands manually. You can run them, the atomics will actually show you like, hey, you just run this from the command line, run it using PowerShell or something like that if it's a Windows machine, and then you just test it, right? You see if it works or not, and then you can document whether it does or not. As you get more advanced, that's when I would start recommending, when you feel more comfortable doing these types of things, or you have more seasoned red team professionals, either that you've hired from a consulting perspective or you're just using internally, then you can do the the more critical systems, right? Because you want to start getting into where are the defenses around our crown jewels, right? So you definitely want to be careful in those kind of scenarios that you're not going to break something in production. But if you have skilled people behind the wheel doing those exercises, that's the exact same as an adversary will be doing as well, right? And so I always encourage people to be careful, but not afraid to test some of these defenses in production. It's a matter of the fact that if you are breached, the adversary is already in your production environment, right? And so being able to simulate as close to that as possible is important. So I think it's a matter of just kind of breaking things down of what you want to test and on what systems, and what those represent out of the whole of your environment, and then just continue to go iterate quickly. I think it doesn't have to be a whole big swath of systems, right? It can just be a small subset.
What I have up on the screen is actually the GitHub for Red Canary. They have a couple different views. They have one matrix that's broken out just by Linux and Mac, and one by Windows. This is all tests, but basically it just mirrors the MITRE matrix. You've got your tactics across the top, and then you've got your techniques. And when you hop into any given technique, you'll note that you have at least one, sometimes multiple, in this case, just one atomic test. And it actually gives you both, the prereqs, the dependencies you got to meet, where you can get the files that you might need to run this thing, in the actual, command line things to execute in your environment. One thing you will note is that, some of these things there isn't a test for yet. There is no atomic. It's an open source project, and so, if you're interested in getting on board, highly encourage you to help these guys out and contribute a test. There was another question we had about, we showed pulling these findings in from the write-ups database in PlexTrac. And the question was, we're pulling in all the TTPs from ATT&CK. That's not actually true. I built those out in about 5 minutes myself. But actually, though, I did have a request, and I like it because once they're built, it's very easy for us to export those into a PTRAC file and then hang them out there on our documentation. So I'm going to get back to the team, and we'll talk about how maybe we can take a methodical way. We've already gotten a good bit of it done just for this demo on building those out for the defense evasion. But yeah, we're happy to share what we have built. If other folks who have PlexTrac are interested in maybe helping build out the atomics into findings that people can import, please hit me up at support@plextrac.com, and I'd love to have your help.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that, Sean, is that we actually are planning on getting as many of the atomics into PlexTrac as possible within the write-ups database. So we can port some of them now, and want to create the rest of them and keep them updated as best as possible according to their GitHub account. That's the best resource that we feel we have today in terms of like what we can put into the write-ups database. The other valuable aspect of using PlexTrac for this is the ability to tag these items with the technique and the tactic, so that not only can you do analytics on those, but if you're using other tools that are testing against the MITRE ATT&CK techniques, and those are ported into PlexTrac, whether imported into PlexTrac, whether it's through the tool imports or some other mechanism. If they're tagged correctly, you can still track all of those across the different sources. So we do plan to bring on all the atomics from the Red Canary, and then we do support other tools like Scythe that also will tag items that are automatically being executed with those techniques.
Great. We got another question here. Someone asked if PlexTrac integrates with ATT&CK. So I would want to get a little deeper into what you're specifically looking. Obviously, ATT&CK is made up of three components. Everything from the collection to the normalization of the data to the display in Kibana. So today we don't have any integrations designed, but philosophically, PlexTrac as a platform is about helping you aggregate all the ways that you identify risk in your environment. And that's after those risks have been validated, right? And so we haven't really focused a lot on real-time integration with SIMs and other real-time alerting things, because at that point, that data has yet to be triaged. And we're really kind of focused on okay, when your team comes in on Monday morning and it's time to get the real work done, where do they go to find out what are the remaining unremediated risks in their environment? Things that have already been validated, that we've maybe done some planning on how we're going to remediate them, or we have a platform to collaborate on how we're going to tackle them. So, we definitely, we would be happy to chat with you about, what data that you're looking to pipe in automatically. We do have an open API, and hit me up at support@plextrac.com. Be happy to chat with you about that.
And I will answer one last question that I guess I answered privately, but it is a good question, and then we'll wrap it up and let everybody get back to their day. But this question was, can we combine Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain with MITRE ATT&CK? And that's a great question. So Lockheed Martin came out with the cyber kill chain several years ago, and it utilizes similar categories, from a threat intelligence perspective, as to like what are the different phases of the cyber kill chain for execution and eventually exfiltration. And so this dovetails on my previous comment, is like that. It's actually great, and we would encourage utilizing as many frameworks as possible that tie into the attack lifecycle as a whole. And so since the kill chain is geared around the attack lifecycle, we would just recommend that you tag those items that you're using with the kill chain under the same categories as the MITRE ATT&CK. So if you have one activity that really accomplishes something in like, say, weaponization within the Lockheed Martin kill chain and execution within MITRE ATT&CK, you can tag that finding with both of those tags, and then you can do analytics on both frameworks. So there's definitely value, and I think it's really important that similar to the way you might have multiple GRC related frameworks, there's now becoming more kill chain related frameworks as well. Well, yep, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to make a shameless plug. We're trying to do 2 of these a month. One really focused on sharing knowledge with the community, but then one for our current and maybe people, customers and people who are maybe interested in PlexTrac, because our development team is moving very quickly, cranking out new features. And while we're doing our best to keep everybody updated via release notes and documentation, sometimes seeing it in action is the best way to learn. So probably be a little shorter, in length, and really just cover things that have rolled out in the last 6 to 8 weeks since the last time that we provided an update on our system enhancements.
Great. Yep, thanks. And so that concludes the second installment of our PlexTrac webinar series for 2020. We really appreciate you guys joining us. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. We'd love to hear feedback too on potentially how you're doing purple teaming in your environment, how you're utilizing the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. And obviously, if you have any questions about PlexTrac specifically, don't hesitate to reach out. We are looking forward to seeing you again on the 27th, Sean, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.